What is up, my friend? Welcome back to the basement. I am Mikey Henninger. This is Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, my mom and your mom's favorite fantasy football podcast. This is episode 22 of the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football podcast, and I hope you're ready to dive right in to Week 11. This is Tuesday's episode, which is the Week 11 Waiver Wire. Now, this week I have 32 different names on the list, and in the description of this episode, regardless of where you're listening to it or watching it, if it's YouTube, podcast, in the description of this episode is going to be a link to the article that lists all 32 players, because there's obviously going to be no time to cover all of them in depth in great detail today. But there's 32 fantasy football players on my radar, on my list, that I would consider adding in fantasy football leagues both before and after waivers run. And the article very clearly delineates the differences between the two, between the players that I would recommend using waiver claims and using priority versus players that I would recommend simply waiting until waivers clear, waking up early Wednesday morning and grabbing them then. Just a quick recap on my philosophy if you have not listened to a waiver wire article in the past. I personally, and again, this is personal, so, obviously take it with a grain of salt and adjust accordingly to your own league, your own settings, your own risk tolerance, everything. But my own personal philosophy has always been to be extremely frugal when it comes to the waiver wire and be extremely frugal when it comes to, where I want to spend priority, where I want to spend my claims, where I want to spend my, blind bidding dollars. Typically, my rule of thumb is if it is a player that I can see being in my lineup at some point, whether it's this week, next week, in the coming weeks, then to me they are worth making that priority claim. If they are not somebody that I'm positive will be in my lineup, if they're just somebody who will basically be a really pretty bench decoration who adds nice depth but won't actually be in my lineup, then to me they're not worth that waiver priority. I would rather save that claim and be prepared to use it on somebody like Rachaad White or a potential league winner if something happens to somebody that's in front of them. So, going through the list and starting with quarterbacks. As usual, there's not really any quarterbacks that I would recommend using any sort of priority, any sort of blind bidding dollars, anything like that. There's no Justin Fields this week. There's no Tua Tagovailoa this week. But I do always offer a list of possible streamers if you find yourself in a Week 11 pinch, be it injuries, be it bye weeks, and you need to find somebody that you can slot into your lineup and basically rent for a week. On my list this week, I have 3 guys that should be top of mind for you. The one that I'll highlight for the purposes of today's episode is Daniel Jones. Now, he is rostered in 64% of Yahoo leagues, so there's actually a better than not chance that he's not available in your league, but he is still available in 3 plus out of every 7 leagues. He is averaging a solid 16.5 fantasy football points per game this season, and in Week 11, he gets a Detroit Lions defense that is allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks at 22.78 points per game. The Giants have an implied Week 11 total of 24.75 points, which is the 7th highest on the 28-team slate. Now, other names on here are Jimmy Garoppolo, who also is 64% rostered. So again, higher owned than we would like to see, but we do also have Marcus Mariota on this list, who's rostered in just 33% of Yahoo leagues, so a pretty good chance that he's available in yours. He's averaging 15.6 fantasy points per game, including 42 rushing yards a game over his last 6. And the Falcons actually opened the Week 11 slate with a implied team total per Vegas, per DraftKings Sportsbooks. Their implied team total is 26.75 points, which is the 4th highest on the entire 28-team slate, which is kind of crazy when you think about the state of that offense and how putrid it is for fantasy football purposes. But Marcus Mariota himself has been he's been a solid play in fantasy football. That game, by the way, the Atlanta Falcons played the Chicago Bears. That game has a 50.5 point over-under, which is the highest on the 14-game slate here in Week 11. It's expected to be a shootout. Marcus Mariota is definitely on the streaming radar in Week 11. All right, let's hop over to running backs. The number one ad that you're going to find on basically any list, including mine, is Rachaad White. And Rachaad White is a player that I would recommend using waiver claim, waiver priority, blind bidding, whatever your league settings are. He is somebody that's worth that sort of priority. There's 2 running backs on this list that I think are worth priority. The first and foremost is Rachaad White. He's 45% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He technically earned the start, the quote-unquote start in Week 10. Now, Leonard Fournette still had 14 touches to Rachaad White's 11 touches. Even that was before Leonard Fournette got hurt and never returned to the game here in Week 10. But it is still noteworthy that Rachaad White had 11 touches prior to Fournette's injury, considering Rachaad White had never gone over 11 touches in a game in his career/season. Now, Fournette did miss the rest of that game with a hip injury, which allowed Rachaad White to finish with 22 touches, all of which were carries. Unfortunately, they weren't catches, so we didn't quite unlock that ceiling and that potential there. But he did have 22 touches/carries for 105 yards, which came out to be 10.5 PPR points. Now, Leonard Fournette and the Buccaneers, they are on bye this week in Week 11, so that gives Fournette another week to heal, but it's still possible that Rachaad White enters Week 12 as an unquestioned lead running back, and if Leonard Fournette sits out Week 12, then Rachaad White is an instant RB1 with legitimate Week 1 workhorse upside, and then at worst, if Leonard Fournette does play in Week 12, then Rachaad White is still worked his way into flex consideration, especially during the bye week. So he's definitely worthy of any sort of blind bidding or waiver priority. He's worth getting on your team because he has a decent chance of finding your starting lineup. The other running back on that list that's worth the claim is Isaiah Pacheco. He's 24% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He played a season/career high, by far, by the way, this past week. He played 56% of the Chiefs snaps in Week 10 and got 16 touches, all of which were carries, turning him into an 82 scoreless yards, aka 8.2 PPR points. Meanwhile, and this is arguably the more important piece of Week 10's data, Clyde Edwards-Helaire played just 4 touches and did not record a single touch in Week 10. Now, Jerick McKinnon, he has 16 targets and 12 catches over the last 2 weeks, and it's crystal clear that he's entrenched as the unflexing, pass-catching specialist out of the backfield for Kansas City, so that's certainly going to cap Isaiah Pacheco's upside and his floor if he's not going to get that type of receiving work. But still, it's pretty clear that the Kansas City Chiefs are, they're shedding one of the 3 heads in their 3-headed rushing attack. And in Week 11, the Kansas City Chiefs are 6.5-point favorites against a Chargers defense that came into Week 10, allowing the second most PPR points per game to running backs. And with that heavy 6.5-point spread, it's entirely possible we see Isaiah Pacheco rack up another 15-plus touches, especially as the Chiefs theoretically try to kill the clock late in the second half. Pacheco is definitely on the RB2 radar, and he's worthy of any sort of priority or blind bidding dollars. Beyond that, I won't dive into the reasons why. You can use the link that's in the description of this episode if you want to read. But the other running backs on this list that, to me, are not worth priority, but they are worth adding after waivers run, would be Jerick McKinnon, Elijah Mitchell, Latavius Murray, Tyler Algier, Kyren Williams, Jaylen Warren, and Alexander Mattison. Moving on to wide receivers, and I'm excited about this one because the bias comes out a little bit as a Packer fan, but Christian Watson is absolutely, the blow-up was very real this week against Dallas. It wasn't a flash in the pan, and don't get me wrong, there's going to be growing pains, there's going to be bumps and bruises. I'm not saying he's going to suddenly be putting up 30 PPR points every single week, but the light bulb started to click on and the door started to open here a little bit for Christian Watson. He's 9% rostered in Yahoo leagues, and the second-round rookie finally exploded onto the scene here in Week 10, playing a season/career high of 84 of the Packers' offensive snaps. And that is the big key here that we're looking at, is that he not only was there a significant uptick in receiving usage and statistics, but he played a career-high 84% of the Packers' snaps. And after he did what he did, he's going to remain locked into that Packers offense. So in those 84% of the Packers snaps, Christian Watson used that opportunity to post an explosive 32.7 PPR points, and he did that on 8 targets, 4 catches, 107 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He actually passed Cooper Kupp, who was the previous season leading wide receiver against Dallas with 25.9 PPR points, and Watson put up 32.7. Now, like I said, there's going to be inconsistency. There's going to be growing pains, and this was likely the best game that Christian Watson will have all year. But he's always been a high upside rookie. The upside has always been there. The talent's always been there. That's not something that really can be questioned. And it's likely that Christian Watson earned more playing time and earned Aaron Rodgers' trust with the explosive effort. And he certainly has an opportunity to make some very real fantasy football noise down the stretch. I'd treat him as a wide receiver 3 with obvious wide receiver 1 upside in any given week, albeit with a scary floor. The other name on this list is Kadarius Toney. Kadarius Toney is rostered in 51% of Yahoo leagues. He jumped up from 9% of the snaps in Week 9 to 44% of the snaps with the Chiefs in Week 10. Now, a good chunk of that may have been due to Juju Smith-Schuster taking one of the most wicked hits I've ever seen on the football field and leaving the game in concussion protocol, but still, Toney jumped up to 44% of the snaps in just his second game with Kansas City. He scored 19 PPR points on 5 targets, 4 catches, 57 yards, 1 touchdown, and 33 rushing yards. He's likely going to continue this upward trajectory of playing time, and he has a possible shootout with the LA Chargers in Week 11 while Mecole Hardman is still injured, and Juju Smith-Schuster, like I mentioned, is in concussion protocol after that terrifying hit in Week 10. It's entirely possible that Kadarius Toney is locked into even 2 wide receiver sets as soon as here in Week 11. And we know that the upside is there. The upside is palpable. The guy's already put up 19 PPR points in just his second game with the Chiefs. There's one more name that I want to mention that I think should be a waiver claim, but I don't recommend him as a waiver claim because he's kind of flying under the radar. Nobody's really talking about him and what's happening here. Paris Campbell is 18% rostered in Yahoo leagues, and the reinsertion of Matt Ryan this past weekend also equaled the rebirth of Paris Campbell in 2022 fantasy football. People might not recognize this, but in the last 3 games, specifically that Paris Campbell has played with Matt Ryan, not Sam Ehlinger, but the last 3 games that Paris Campbell has played with Matt Ryan, Campbell is averaging 20.77 PPR points per game, 10.67 targets, 8 catches, and 67.7 yards with 3 touchdowns, 1 in each of the last 3 games. Obviously, that's a tiny sample size, but those are legitimate wide receiver 1 numbers, and it's the production that we've been expecting from Paris Campbell since he came into the league a few years ago. Obviously, we need to be conscious of the low sample size. We need to be conscious of the Colts offense and how it can go up and down like a roller coaster in any given week. But the fact that he's put up such significant numbers in each of the last 3 games that he's played with Matt Ryan, which, by the way, makes a ton of sense with Matt Ryan's playing style and the state of his arm these days in 2022, Paris Campbell should absolutely be on the radar, and he doesn't seem to be on anybody's list. He doesn't seem to be on anybody's radar. He's somebody that, production-wise, I think is worthy of a fantasy football claim or blind bidding dollars. But I'm going to take my chances this week that because nobody's talking about him, I'm going to take my chances that he slips past waivers without anybody paying much attention, and then I'm going to add him to as many of my 22 fantasy football leagues as I possibly can. The last wide receiver that I want to mention is not somebody that I would use a waiver claim on, but he is somebody that would be high on my list when I wake up early on Wednesday morning. That's Donovan Peoples-Jones, who's actually been on this list for the last, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. He's 35% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He has 11 or more PPR points in 5 of the last 6 games, including each of the last 4. And most importantly, he's insanely high on my/Basement Brood Fantasy Football's Touchdown Regression Cheat Sheet. The Touchdown Regression Cheat Sheet is something that I put together for all 250 plus of my subscribers every single week, and it's basically a easy to follow list that gives my subscribers a mathematical prediction, or at least a likelihood of who is and isn't mathematically likely to score touchdowns in that game, or sooner rather than later. For instance, here in Week 10, on that Touchdown Regression Cheat Sheet, we had Justin Jefferson, Jonathan Taylor, Tyreek Hill, Aaron Jones, Chris Godwin, Devin Singletary, Dalton Schultz, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Nico Collins, all of which totaled 10 touchdowns this week, and all of which were on that touchdown regression list. Very high on that list this week is Donovan Peoples-Jones. So that list, long story cut super short, it basically indicates that he is likely to score a touchdown much sooner than later, and hopefully that's going to be this week. And even if not, Deshaun Watson's return is just a few weeks away. All right, as for tight ends, there's no way of sugarcoating it. Oh, wait. Going back to wide receivers quick. Other names on this list, and you can click the link that's in the description to read why. But we have Van Jefferson, Ben Skoranek, Allen Robinson if he's available, Darius Slayton, Julio Jones, Zay Jones, Nico Collins, and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, although I must mention that Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is more so on there as a joke or checking a box. He's not somebody that I'm actually targeting in fantasy football leagues. All right, hopping over to tight ends, and there's no way of sugarcoating it. It's ugly. The tight end pool is always ugly. It is every week. It will be for the rest of time. But in Week 11, it's especially ugly. There's no standout streamers. There's no real matchups that are worth targeting. It's just a really ugly week for tight ends. Now, there's 2 people that I have on this list. One is Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet is rostered in just 59% of Yahoo leagues, so that's over half. So technically, chances are he's not available, but he definitely is worth a look in your league. Type his name in the search bar, see if he's available. If he is, Cole Kmet needs to be rostered on 100% of fantasy football leagues at this point, which is hilarious when you think about how the season started for Cole Kmet. But he has back-to-back games of 21 or more PPR points, which is at the tight end position. That's just pure goldmine. And he's been the main beneficiary, besides Justin Fields, of Chicago's recent elite offensive eruption. He needs to be rostered in and started in 100% of leagues from here on out. So if he is available in yours, and he's available in 41% of leagues, he's actually worth a waiver claim. He's worth that waiver priority. The other name I have on here is Juwan Johnson, and it's incredibly gross, but he does have 12 or more PPR points in 3 of his last 4 games, including 2 pretty big games of 15.4 points and 20.2 points. All right, and I'll throw a defense out to you as well. The Baltimore Ravens this week, they're 66% rostered, so more rostered than not. But their opponent they're at home this week against the Carolina Panthers. And the Panthers opened the Week 11 slate with an implied total of just 15 points, which is the type of number that you would absolutely want to attack with a team defense if you have the opportunity in fantasy football. By the way, if you like all of this type of analysis, there's a really good chance that you're a lot like my 250 plus subscribers that are buying me a beer every month in exchange for a weekly package where they are receiving I have a tool that I create called the lineup setting heat map. I'll drop a link to that in the description of this episode as well. But it's a tool that people are using when making really critical start, sit, or player prop betting or DFS decisions. My subscribers have access to our member community, which has turned into a dedicated and energetic group of friends, basically, that are dedicated to helping each other win and work through some critical decisions together. Being in that Discord community, by the way, means you also have access to having my recommendations and notifications pushed straight to your phone. So when news breaks or injuries happen, you'll get a notification from me that encourages you to go add somebody from the waiver wire before your league mates do, right? It's usually a race to who can get to the computer or who can log onto their app faster and pick up the player. My subscribers are getting access to my weekly Touchdown Regression Cheat Sheet that we talked about. They're getting access to my streamer cheat sheet. So if they need a fill-in quarterback, tight end, kicker, or defense, they have access to my quick and easy cheat sheet. And of course, weekly rankings that are helpful for splitting hairs. And again, they're getting all of this every single week from me. And all they're doing is buying me a beer every single month. That's it. All I ask is that you buy me a beer a month. That's a wrap. That's going to do it for today's show. I'm going to be back on Friday, as I have been recently, with episode 23. And episode 23 is going to be I haven't decided what I'm going to call it yet. I'm either going to call it the Hit It or Quit It list, which is basically players that I like in particular this week or dislike in particular this week. Or I'm going to call it the Hit List or Shit List. So if you have a preference, please, feel free to drop me a comment, hit me up on Twitter at BBFF Mikey, or let me know what you're thinking. Let me know which list I should go with. The options are the Hit It or Quit It, or the Hit List or Shit List. I'm not sure what I'm going to call it yet, but anyway, that episode's going to be coming out on Friday. It's going to be my players that I'm loving for this week versus players that I'm just not into this week compared to weeks that I usually would like those players. Until then, until Friday, please, please, please take 69 seconds to like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the show with one person that you think would dig this type of content. Thanks again for coming here. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks again for listening, watching, being here. Honest to goodness, you're helping a guy chase his dream, and I can't thank you enough for that. I'll never be able to, even though I'll say it every time at the end of every show. But really appreciate you being here. It's time for me to hit the hay. It is 12:18 a.m., and I am dragging. I am ready for bed. Thanks again for popping in. Cheers. This brew's for you.